This episode is sponsored by Postman. Postman is the world's leading API collaboration platform, and they just launched Postman AI Agent Builder, the quickest way to build AI agents. Start building at postman.com/podcast/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are coming up on the end of March, beginning of April, depending on when you're listening to this. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective. And for me, the last couple of weeks have been, I don't know, probably something that a lot of you go through where you're sort of disconnected from your regular job. So I've been working on a bunch of sort of, quote unquote, special projects for the last couple of weeks. And it, was stuff that was like very time sensitive, very, bunch of meetings, bunch of stuff had to get created, a bunch of, coordination with a lot of different people and so forth. So all interesting stuff, but kind of took me away from my normal sort of day-to-day job. And it was, kind of coming out of it, having some stuff finished now, was one of those things where you kind of get this feeling of like, maybe a little bit like you get when you come back from vacation, or if, you just maybe you've been traveling a bunch, for example, or whatever. And kind of a feeling where you're like, I don't really have a sense of bearings right now. I'm not really sure what's going on. And I don't mean like in a, completely, Men in Black, you lost your memory type of thing. But, in our industry, things tend to move fairly quickly, and there's a lot of change that happens. And, that change doesn't always have to be like huge, but it can just kind of be incremental enough. And sometimes you kind of come back into things and you're like, I just need to figure out like what's going on. Right. And I got to thinking about this because I feel like a lot of times, and we've heard this from a lot of people who write into us about careers and different things in which they go, I'm at a transition point in my career, for example, and they'll say like, I've been doing something for a while. I'm not sure if I'm committed to continuing to do this track for a long time. So maybe you're in a more technical role, an engineering role or something, which you sort of fall on the more technical side of the spectrum. And you might look at it and you go, I don't know if I want to continue to get as deep into one specific subject, or I don't know that I like the specific area that I'm working on. Maybe you've been doing, I don't know, let's just take like virtualization for a long time, and you're looking at the virtualization market and you're saying, boy, there's a lot of change going on there. Cloud had, a lot of things that happened. Maybe you weren't as involved with that as you wanted to be, or you're starting to see stuff happen with AI, or maybe you've been in between kind of an infrastructure role and an application role, or something along those lines, or a support role versus writing code, or whatever it might be. And you might be asking yourself, like, do I want to continue to do that, or is the path I'm on going to allow me to continue to grow for a number of years, for like the next 5 years? Can you kind of map out what that looks like, or do you kind of say, well, I don't know that I want to be on that track, right? Like, I don't know that I could become a distinguished engineer, right? Maybe you just sort of say to yourself, like, I don't know if that's me or not. And we get a lot of that from people as they sort of go, like, I'm not sure, not so much about the future, but like, where they should go, how deep they should go. Do they want to transition from like an individual contributor role to something that's more in a leadership role? So a manager, a senior team leader, a director, senior director, whatever that might be, in which the day-to-day of what you do isn't as technically involved. It's not as hands-on. You're not building things. You're not managing and operating stuff. Maybe you're managing people in teams. You're managing more budgets, whatever it might be. And one of the things that always comes up in that is this same sort of feeling that I'm kind of experiencing here for the last couple of weeks is if you were to take those roles, there's always this fear of like, I don't know to the level of depth that I knew before. I don't feel like I have as much control over the topic, the subject, the area that you focus on as much as you did before. And it's weird because that fear sometimes can be like 5%. It could be 25%. It could be a lot. It could be 50%, whatever it is. But I find a lot of times we get people that write in and go like, I am really, really concerned that I'm gonna lose my technical knowledge. And if I lose my technical knowledge, that's the thing that I kind of built my hat on, I kind of built my career on, or built my brand or my persona, or what people were paying me for. How do I replicate that, right? Or how do I transition out of that? And so I think there is a sense sometimes when either you're thinking about some sort of career move or change or whatever it might be, especially in the technical world, where so much, whether it's truly meritocratic or it's based on something you can do and measure and so on and so forth. But I think that thing happens in a lot of things. And so, kind of coming back to this, I think there is an interesting thing that happens when you are looking to transition from like an IC role in a technical role of some sort into more of a leadership, management, team lead type of role. That's sort of oftentimes the first step of like, am I as connected to the technology as I was before? And if I'm not, on literally a day-to-day, feature by feature, understanding the technology, do I understand the protocols? Do I have examples of what I've done? If I get away from that, what does that mean, right? So that's one of the first things we see. The second thing that we see a lot of people questioning or asking questions about is like, I'm thinking about moving into a less technical role, right? So maybe think of it as like not so much in your group or in your sort of vertical career chain or your vertical organization chart. You're actually thinking about going like laterally into something that is, quote unquote, less technical, right? Maybe you're going to, work in a role in which you are kind of straddling between the technology and more of the business side of what you do, right? Whether it's, building products and services, but then having to bring them to market. Maybe you're working more with project managers on long-term types of activities. Maybe you're working more with business and finance people to really kind of understand the full economics of whatever you're doing. Maybe you're building data centers or whatever you might be doing. And so I think what we see is a lot of sort of uncertainty or questions about like what happens if you do that sort of moving up type of role, sort of vertically moving up and being a little further away from the day-to-day of technology, or sort of moving laterally left or right from wherever you are, in which the technology becomes a smaller part of what you do and you're having to leverage other types of skills, right? Again, they could be analytical skills or business skills or finance skills or whatever they might be. And I think it's an interesting phenomenon that goes on. And again, like I said, I think I've been going through this for the last couple of weeks. Like I said, I've been disconnected from what my regular job was. In my case, I get to kind of come back to my regular job, but I think it's the same sort of phenomenon in which you kind of wonder, what do people value from what you do? And I think it's a really interesting exercise to kind of go through, because it sort of forces you to understand like what's the most important thing that people value from what you do or what your group does or what the output of whatever you create is. I think that's a good exercise to kind of go through. And then I think it's also a good exercise to go through, how does the business value your group or kind of what you do, right? So anyways, I think it's a good exercise to go through. I think it's a kind of a humbling exercise, because you do sort of realize, okay, your natural inclination is to think, I've been working on this thing. Somebody thought it was valuable. Somebody funded this. The company funded this. It's got deadlines. It's got dependencies. It's got all these other things. And to sort of step back and be like, okay, if this thing was gone, or you were not necessarily in the role you were in, right? Kind of an extreme sort of way of thinking about it. But how would things function, right? And if you were on the other side of the fence, if you were receiving the thing that you do, where do you see value in it, right? So sort of put yourself in your stakeholders, your customers, your partners sort of role, and ask yourself like, what value do they see out of it? And not necessarily in the context of like, they interact with our service, or we write this code, or we deliver this presentation, or whatever it might be, but like, what part of sort of a kind of like a supply chain, if you will, do you play? And again, are you a foundational thing to what they do? Are you just sort of an add-on to what they do to help differentiate? All those sort of things, right? So I think that's sort of an interesting exercise. And then I think the other part that's sort of worth doing as you're going through this exercise, if you do it, and again, I think a lot of technical people, probably people that listen to this show at some point in their career, whether it's now or a year from now or 3 years ago or whatever it might be, you start to ask yourself, like, well, what happens? Do you feel like you can sort of justify what you do if when you go into the room with other people that depend on you, or again, they could be your customers, they could be your partners, they could be your stakeholders, whatever. But what do you do if you're no longer the best expert in the room? If you're just kind of one of many, right? Like, do you feel okay with that? Right? Like, are you, does that sort of break down some sort of mental model that you have of yourself or an expectation you have of yourself? And same sort of thing of what happens, what level of not having all the answers that you used to have all the time, again, kind of going back to being very technical and sort of knowing all the capabilities of something or features or ways this thing integrate or way that things were architected, like what percentage of that do you feel like you can be okay with without having, right? And I think this is another sort of interesting mental exercise to go through, because the thing that does is it's not so much a, can you justify what you do, or do you recognize the things that people think what you do is valuable, right? From their perspective. But it also really kind of brings into question, or it brings into understanding, how do you go about learning? What is your network, whether it's like internal colleagues, groups, whether it's external sources of information, whether it's, your sort of self-motivation to learn, whatever those things might be. How do you go about preparing yourself with a bunch of information that, for those situations in which you're like, okay, I was in that room, I was in that meeting, I got asked a question, I didn't know the answer. I didn't want to just go, I don't know. You answered it hopefully with a, right now I don't have the answer to that. I'll get back to you. I know how to get that. And in your mind, are you like, do I know how to get that? And I think it also is sort of brings into question, like, do I understand what the question is? Like, am I still in the frame of mind, in the scope of, the context of the conversations you're having on a regular basis, the level of complexity, or the level of, what the business does, and all those sort of things. And so I've been kind of going through this in asking myself, like, having this sort of feeling of like, okay, I'm a little disconnected from stuff. How do I get back into being connected with stuff? But then also really kind of asking myself, like, have I done enough to build out the network that I need? And again, this could be a matter of people that it could be groups that you interact with online, it could be Slack, it could be Reddit channels, it could be whatever. Do I have a model? Do I have a mechanism? Do I have a model? Do I have the resources I need to continue to learn at the level that I'm needed in some other role, right? And this is also another good exercise where you kind of look around the room sometimes, and maybe your room is filled with people at different levels of the organization. So you've got individual contributors and management sort of leaders, and then you've got maybe more senior people, and kind of having a sense of like, okay, what level of depth do they have, right? Can I achieve that? But also, what level of not depth do they have, and how do they manage around that, right? And I think this is another sort of good exercise of like, how well prepared are you to be in a position in which you're, not as connected as maybe you felt like before. So anyways, I bring all that up to say I think it's a good exercise, and not just because I'm randomly having to be, kind of going through this right now, but it's a good exercise to ask yourself, especially if you're in the technical domain. And Aaron and I have had this conversation a million times, because him and I have kind of gone through things within our career path of asking ourselves, like, how technical do we want to be? How close to like the products that we build do we want to be? How close to sort of the business of what we do we want to be? How well prepared are we if we took away 50% of the technical things we did do we feel prepared to be in the business world, what we do? If we were to take away, some aspect of, or if we move into some new technology, like essentially we're kind of walking in 50% less of what we did before, like how much do we have to sort of ramp up to something, but also how much is our ability to learn, learning how to learn, is that sort of built in to being able to transition to from one thing to another? So I think it's a good set of things to ask yourself, maybe once a year, maybe every 6 months. It really just kind of depends on how much change you've got going involved, how quickly the world around you kind of evolves. But I think, if you sort of ask yourself, do I feel like the value that I provide is still embedded at a real low, deep level? And is that something you think you can continue to grow with, or you sort of stagnated? So where are you? How far do you think you can get with that setup, skill set, and so forth? And if you moved away from that, like, is that a path that you aspire to? Is that something you think you'd want to do? Right. So it's an interesting thing to explore. Possibly talking to people above and left and right of you in an organization and kind of exploring what they do. Asking yourself, how comfortable are you with being uncomfortable? If you are making changes, right? Do I feel like I can live with a level of discomfort while I'm learning things, while I'm reestablishing myself, while I am reorienting myself to a new sort of world? Like, how much discomfort are you willing to do, and for how long are you willing to do that, right? Because that's one of the things you're kind of asking yourself with change. That discomfort could be everything from like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to be working with a completely different group. I might be working with a very different set of people, so I have to learn the dynamics of that. The financials around what you do might change, right? Like you might have to take a step up or a step down, or the way that you get paid is more variable than it was before. Like all those sort of things are worth taking a look at. And then really start to think about, are you maximizing what you provide to those people that are outside of your immediate group, right? Like, do your stakeholders, do your shareholders, do your partners, do your, kind of teams that you collaborate with, do they all appreciate the value that you provide? Do you understand the value that they think they get, and those sort of things? And then lastly, as you're going through these transitions, or you're going through these times of uncertainty, how well have you built your network of, again, people, sources of information, groups to collaborate with, people you can ask questions to, all those sort of things. Like, how well have you built those things to help you quickly fill in the gaps that you're going to have in any new thing that you're doing, or any change thing that you're doing? So I think it's a good exercise to go through, maybe every 6 months, maybe once a year, depending on, again, how much variability you've got, how much change you've got going on in your roles. But I think it's a very natural thing to sort of be uncertain about whenever you have those times when you feel like you're losing technical knowledge. Because again, so much of what we do in the technology world is sort of based on, what do you know? How good are you? We're having discussions these days about like, hey, will developers be replaced by co-pilots? And, do I still need this kind of engineer? And do I still need that kind of role? And, does platform engineering change? Like we're going through these things all the time, whether it's whatever it is. Maybe it's vibe coding now. Maybe you're freaking out because you're a developer and vibe coding is coming along, whatever it might be. I think it's a good thing to do. And then I think it's a good time to kind of do some good self-evaluation, to really kind of look around at people that do it very well, and and kind of evaluate, like, where am I, and to go through that. So anyways, I thought this would be sort of interesting just to sort of talk out again. I feel like because so much of what I do kind of varies quite a bit, maybe not necessarily in wanting to do something else, but in just, I bounce around between a lot of different stuff that has short time frames, and sort of fire drills become a regular thing. So I kind of go through it a lot, but I do get a chance to talk to a number of people who, kind of come along and go, hey, how do you go about doing this? And it kind of was triggered. I did a podcast with was called, Software Defined Interviews. Michael Cote, who's been on, I talked about doing it. I'll put a link in the show notes. But one of the things that was asked to me was just like, how do you go into environments in which maybe you don't necessarily know everything? Like, how do you give a talk about something that you're not a 10-year expert on? And so it kind of re-triggered for me, the thought process that I went through as I was talking about that. So anyways, hopefully this is a little bit useful. I think it's a good exercise to do every once in a while, as I mentioned. But I don't think it's an unusual thing to sort of go through. But would love to hear people's feedback on like, how do you deal with those transitions? How do you deal with that level of uncertainty about stuff? And, how do you think about, when you make changes in terms of either how you learn or what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to take on more responsibility or you're trying to be more in depth with something or whatever that might be. Would love to learn what people are doing well and what they think they're struggling with. So anyways, I'll wrap it up. And for the one person who always, mentions that they think it's funny that I talk about being hoarse and having pollen and stuff. Yep. It's that time of year. It's what we call sneezing season. So apologize for any sort of nasaliness that may come out of this podcast. We've probably got another month of this left in North Carolina. But anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Hope you're starting to enjoy spring. The weather's starting to get better everywhere, at least where we're at. And hopefully for you as well. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for continuing to send us feedback and great ideas for shows. And I know we are a little bit booked up as far as taking on new guests, but always interested in new ideas, whether they're for weekend perspectives or just, hey, we don't feel like you guys are covering something well enough. Please dive into that. So with that, we will wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.